In a recent episode of George Janko's podcast, he questions the doctrine of the Eucharist being the real presence of Jesus Christ.
I have a hard time looking at bread and claiming it is God because it goes against the 10 Commandments. We cannot look at anything and claim that it is God. And
However, what George fails to recognize is that from the very beginning of the Christian Church, the belief in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist has been a core teaching. This wasn't a later invention. It was universally held by the early Church Fathers and remained uncontested until the 16th century. It wasn't until Huldrych Zwingli, a Swiss reformer in the 1520s, that the symbolic-only interpretation of the Eucharist was introduced. Zwingli argued that the bread and wine were merely symbols and not the actual body and blood of Christ. His view was a radical departure from over 1,500 years of consistent Christian teaching and was even opposed by other reformers like Martin Luther, who still affirmed the real presence in some form. So for George, and others who deny the real presence, to be correct, they would have to believe that every Christian from the time of the Apostles until Zwingli was wrong. That would include saints and theologians like Saint Ignatius of Antioch, who in the early 2nd century explicitly wrote about the Eucharist as the flesh of Christ, Saint Augustine, who reaffirmed this belief in his writings, and countless others who shaped the early Church. To suggest they were all wrong would mean that the Church universally taught error for over a millennium, and that those who faithfully received the Eucharist during that time were unknowingly committing idolatry. That's not just a theological disagreement. It's a massive historical and doctrinal claim that undermines the continuity and authority of the Christian faith itself.